Welcome to the Dad's Doomsday Guide. Today we have not one, but two very special guests on the show. Ron and Les from Distributed Security Incorporated, a private security company that trains individuals and teams to actively defend against violent threats. Guys, welcome and thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Scott. Glad to be here.
Thanks for having us, Scott.
I guess to kick things off, can you guys give just a kind of a brief rundown of who you are, what your experience is, and how you came to be with DSI?
Yeah, sure. My name's Ron Danielewski. I'm an executive VP at Distributed Security. I'm also the chief instructor. I started teaching back in the 80s. Been a while. Various federal gigs. Ended up doing my own thing, starting DSI. I think it's about 2011. We were called something different back then, but that's kind of my history with it.
And sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. No, go ahead.
And as far as training experience goes, and did you have involvement through like military overseas? How did that play out? Is that what you're talking about in terms of starting in the 80s?
Yeah, I started out in the Marine Corps in the mid 80s. Eventually got out of the Marine Corps, transitioned to the civilian side, ended up working with the Department of Energy, their nuclear courier section, went to work with the Federal Air Marshals, and then did contracting overseas as an independent contractor with DynCorp, Blackwater, and Triple Canopy.
Oh, wow. So what you're saying is you know kind of what you're talking about.
I at least got an idea. I got a clue.
Okay.
At least I know that much. Yeah.
What about you, Les?
Yeah, Les Leslie, Vice President Business Development for Distributed Security. I kind of started off similarly to Ron. I was on the Army side and not the Marine Corps side, but spent some time as an infantryman in the Army. Got out into the 90s. Ran a handful of my own businesses and acted as a consultant in different ways over time. Have spent an awful lot of time instructing one way, shape, or form or another, either martial arts or firearms or what have you. And I've been with DSI a couple of years at this point.
Nice. And what kind of, out of curiosity, martial arts, what kind of is your area of expertise there?
I don't know that I'd say I have an area of expertise, Scott.
Yeah.
I've been around a long time. I've studied a number of different arts, but yeah, I'm at this point I'm just an old guy. You know, got a lot of training scars. Yeah,
I bet. I guess because I tried to. I mean, from my point of view, coming from a law enforcement family, my dad always kind of showed us the underbelly of society. So like always the dark side of what could happen, right? Where we were considered sometimes kind of, not neurotic is too strong of a word, but you know, people always go, oh, you do that, or, oh, you're worried about that. Like that never happens. But you know, through my dad's profession, we always saw moments where things would happen. We were like, hey, this isn't as rare as people might think it is. And that kind of was my environment for a long time, and thinking about kind of single threats. You know, when you talk about home invasions, you think about one person coming in burglarizing or one person coming after you for whatever reason. But then with this last kind of whole civil unrest thing that's kind of been going on this past year, it started to really kind of shift my thinking into like mobs. What do you do if like a big group descends on your home? And realizing that law enforcement, and I always knew this, was a reactionary force. I mean, most of the time, and my dad would always tell us this, they're coming to you after the fact, after something's already occurred. So to me, this is kind of like as close to doomsday as you can get, right? Whether you're protecting your family, your neighborhood, your church, where you work. And it got me thinking I need to understand this, which was kind of how I eventually found my way to Ron and trying to figure this out and what we could talk about. But I guess to start off this kind of very deep subject, for someone like me who kind of like recognizes this as a potential threat and then comes to you guys and says, hey, like I want to learn more about this, how to protect myself, my community, my family. Where do you guys start in terms of training for that individual?
Well, everything really begins at the individual level with the individual gun handling, the individual tactics training, et cetera. Once you have that down, then when you have other people around you that have the same baseline, if you will, understand the same tactics, techniques, communications, and we start on team training. And then that naturally rolls right into, for instance, the defense of business, churches and schools, community, because now we're working with teams, dealing with teams, working together. But it all starts with the individual.
Mm-hmm. And how much typically, I guess, when you're talking about training, does someone need to become proficient in what they're doing? Because, it's always like, you always talk about like muscle memory and how many hours it takes to perfect something. In terms of firearms training, how long is someone looking at before they are, typically going to react in a moment and be like, okay, I understand what to do, or at least my body's going to react in a way that's positive versus negative and fall back on some kind of bad habits or some movie you saw where you're like, oh yeah, I can do that, and it's going to beat that guy.
Right.
How many hours and how many, like, what typically do you guys see in individuals who do this?
Sure, and it's a legitimate question, and the answer is about 90 days, and 16 of those days, or 16 hours in that month, would be spent actually getting training. At about you can go an hour at a time, or you can go 4 hours at a time. But you could go even, if you want to go 8 hours a shot, you could do that. But the fewer you take, the less it feels like you're kind of drinking from the fire hose.
Yeah.
So 90 days, you're looking at about approximately 16 hours of live fire training. And then the rest of that time, approximately 3 to 4 times a week, you'd be doing practice. We call it dry practice, not actually practicing with a loaded weapon, but you're practicing with a unloaded firearm to learn the skills you need to learn at about 20 minutes per opportunity. So you're looking at about an hour a week on top of that for about 90 days. So 90 days is the short answer. You can get her done with minimal investment of time and effort.
And then kind of continuing from that, is there like a refresher period to where you should be kind of going out there and doing these things again to kind of maintain that muscle memory? Or once you have that, do you guys find that it kind of sticks with you?
So that's really the right question, Scott. Proficiency comes from training, and training is instruction plus practice. Mm-hmm. And that practice is persistent, right? I mean, every skill is perishable. Mm-hmm. And so it doesn't matter how good your training is. If you don't use that skill, it will diminish, right? It will perish. It won't be nearly as potent as if you're constantly working through that stuff and refining through practice. Mm-hmm. So, if you actually want to be good at this and have a skill set that's usable when you need it, in those low probability but high impact events, that persistent practice after the fact via dry practice and on the range, like Ron was talking about, is key. And
do you guys, because I've had a couple instances where, like, maybe 1 or 2 in my life to where, like, legitimately my life was in danger. And I just remember one of them was a carjacking that almost occurred. And luckily my dad was there and he pulled out his gun. We had this huge standoff. But I just remember the tunnel vision that I got in that moment when I think I was like 18 was just incredible. And I don't think a lot of people maybe who haven't been in those situations realize just how primal and like just fight or flight your body goes into. And it just, I could see through, like, I was looking through a toilet paper roll at the guy who was like the threat, and I was oblivious to whatever else was going on around me. And it turned out another guy was hiding in some cars that came out later. I mean, he could have come up and just like popped me. I would have never known he was even there. Is that 90 days? I mean, because you guys have done so much training, because you have trained so many people. Do you see a point where do those people who are so, like you talk about, like Navy SEALs or whatever elite force, do you get to a point where you've done so much training you don't have that happen? Is that possible, or do you always have to fight that on some level just as a human being?
Yeah, that's another really good question, and the answer is yes. You can train to that level. What we were talking about before was the gun handling portion. Mm-hmm. There is a second portion of that in the individual portion that is what we call reality-based training. That's when we put you in a environment as close to real life as we can get. It includes taking modified weapons that shoot out little paintballs, and putting you head to head against another live human being. So, should you fail to perform properly, there is pain involved.
I can attest. I've been hit with those, and they hurt really, really bad.
Yeah, they'll wake you up, no doubt. But yeah, it's this all revolves around what we call Boyd's decision-making process, the OODA loop: observation, orientation, decision, action. And people get wrapped up in that orientation phase because they haven't had the training. They don't know what that violence can look like. They don't know what to do during that. So, yes, there is training you can receive to get you to a point you're comfortably operating it. That's the whole purpose of reality-based training, is to expose you to those highly charged emotional moments and teach you that you can, in fact, operate comfortably inside that environment.
Mm-hmm. And is that typically also within that 90 days, or is that kind of something that continues on beyond that?
It can be in that 90 days. We do offer tier 3 packages, but it's still going to be, here's the downside. If you come out to any school, I don't care who you're going to, for 2, 3, 4 days of training, it does feel like you're drinking out of a fire hose. Mm-hmm. And you can learn a lot, but like we were just pointing back to, what do you have as far as the unconscious mind goes for retention of those techniques? So the important thing then is, after that type of training, that you come back and you do that, as we've been talking about, that persistent practice, that persistent proper practice, doing it over again until it becomes second nature, if you will. So you can do that. And again, 90 days, that's a generalization. We know we can put a majority of people through that 90 days. Some people are going to go through it slower. Some people will breeze right through that. But 90 days is a pretty good mark for that.
And when someone comes to you guys to train, and I know we kind of discussed this in our previous conversation, if someone lives kind of far away or outside the area, are they able to kind of start the process with you guys and then find someone locally who's, ex-military or police, who is able to kind of stick with your curriculum to continue the training locally? Or how does that work in terms of logistics for you guys?
Yeah, absolutely. Ideally, locally, we'd love to have an instructor out there. So if you've got a guy who'd like to work with you as a student, we've got all the curricula for the instructors, so we're happy to help them help our students get the training they need, and hopefully, there'll be some kind of a mutual beneficial partnership we can come up with them in the future. So yeah, absolutely, you don't have to come to us. We just need to make sure you're getting the right training. That's all.
Yeah, that was one of the things I thought about, because I've gone in and out of this since, doing police work for a short time. And I've thought, man, I really wish I could get in and train. You see, a lot of times you'll see people, whether it's, celebrities or whoever, and they'll go out to some kind of gun range or these cool places, and they're doing all this firearms training and like learning how to, do different tactics. And I'm like, man, I wish I could do that. But it seems like it's so, elite or so far out there. But then when I found you guys, I was like, oh, that's really cool. You can learn this kind of stuff from ex-military police. And I found you guys to kind of referrals. But if someone who doesn't know, maybe who's listening to this, or they're trying to find something local in the area, whether it's you guys or somebody else, are there any red flags that you guys kind of put up as like, hey, if, people offering training, maybe this isn't the best place, or are they pretty much, as long as they're kind of ex-military? Just, because you're always concerned with, are these tactics they're teaching you correct, and are the, how do you know for the average civilian if this is kind of like a good spot to be or not in terms of training and organizations that offer it?
Yeah, well, I think you're going to, first thing you're going to look at is, how long has this organization been around? The individual that's doing the training, just because you're in the military doesn't mean that you actually know how to train people. I know that's like a common concept. Hey, I got a brother, uncle, cousin, whatever was, Navy SEAL, Green Beret, whatever, will train me. But no, it's it's like anything else in work. You've got to do in life. You've got to do your due diligence. You got to look into the background. You got to see what the curricula is, know what they're teaching you, and that's kind of tough to do if you're really not like sure of what you're looking for, you're probably better off sticking with the bigger, well-named schools, unless you've got somebody in the community that has a good reputation, that has a good curriculum that other people are recommending to you. But yeah, there's no national system for finding a good instructor, quote unquote. Even the national systems that they do have aren't really all that beneficial.
Okay. So
well, another thing to keep in mind too, and this might be another way for folks to vet a prospective instructor. Ron's made reference to curriculum. We have a pretty broad and deep curriculum, and we spent a lot of time refining it and making sure that it's actually useful. But understanding that we're not sending a man to the moon. Okay. This is gunfighting. Okay. There are certain things that work, and there are a whole lot of other things that don't work. And so at DSI, we do have an online defense academy that comes on a subscription basis, and there's an awful lot of content there, video, manuals, things like that you could use to familiarize yourself, and then use that as a frame of reference for whether or not somebody local was teaching things, essentially in line with the way we are, because we're not teaching anything that's revolutionary here, is my point. And so for the most part, anybody who's worth their salt as an instructor is going to be teaching things very, very similarly to the way we are. And so you could get a glimpse at that. You could use that as a frame of reference, kind of a lens through which to look at other people training.
Okay. Yeah, and I'd add to that as well is go in there, take a look at the actual range time you're spending. If most of your time that you're spending, let's say you're going out for an 8-hour class or 4-hour class, and if more than a quarter of that is spent in a classroom, probably not what you want to be doing. You should be on the range, weapons manipulation dry, weapons manipulation live. That's the whole thing you're supposed to be paying for. So you want to get the hands-on experience. And if it's just classroom, pretend guns, probably not what you're really looking for.
Yeah, I think we talked about it last time. Is one of the things that I noticed when I went through the police academy is, we did have a lot of firearms training, but there was a lot of classroom time, significantly more than I think anybody there wanted. And it was all theoretical, like, hey, if you get in this situation, this is how you react, or these are your options, or these are and I understand you need to learn the law and like what you can and can't do, but there was very little emphasis put on scenarios until the very end. And I remember just going into FTO, training for those people who don't know. And I was just like, shit, like I haven't done any of this stuff. And I felt like I was a fish out of water, and I had to like kind of relearn everything. And then even guys, who are training you, excuse me, where it's like, oh yeah, you don't do it like that. That's what they tell you in the academy, but this is how it kind of really goes down. And I just remember being really disappointed. And I don't know why, because these guys are like, they're experienced guys who are, I would imagine, developing this curriculum. And they're not like, hey, we need to get out, or we need to present scenarios that are actually applicable to real life. And I don't understand why there seems to be that gap with a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, it's the nature of bureaucracy. I think you and I were talking about this last time when we were talking about the Marine Corps just changing its qual course after arguing about it for over 2 decades. So yeah, it's both the police and the people have a problem, and that's the politicians. And and you look at the cops, and I've known cops my entire adult life, worked with cops, trained with cops, and good quality guys. And you know that there's nothing more they want than to be there when it goes down. But due to the tyranny of distance and time, they can't do that. And they want the training, but due to the, politicians that don't see the value in that, you end up with these bureaucratic clusters for training. The training first of all, doesn't get funded well. It is a problem. out there.
Mhm.
And it's not with all police departments. Usually your larger departments that have a lot of money flowing through, they can definitely do a better job. But the smaller departments are the ones that are always hurting for good quality training. So it's no surprise to me that your academy training and your field training didn't quite line up.
Yeah.
Because that's ran by the state, right? And what does the state know about the local? So
Yeah.
there you go.
Yeah. Now, do you guys, when we talk about all this kind of training, and I know for sure, Ron, I know you have kids, and Les, I think you mentioned you do, but how do you guys approach it from a child perspective with my kids, like as they get older in training? How much do you actually force them to go through some of this stuff that you kind of like, oh, this is really going to help them if there's like an active shooter at a school or whatever it may be in the future? Or do you find with, age appropriate, obviously learning how to handle a gun? Like I was, there were guns in my home growing up. So at an age where my father thought it was appropriate, he taught us gun safety, don't touch certain things, or this is what you do. Do you find it's better just to keep it simple in terms of scenarios with kids? And I guess kind of what ages in your mind, kind of, because you guys, like I mentioned before, it's like when you have people within law enforcement or military and kind of you see the underbelly of kind of what can happen, you tend to kind of, slip scenarios in there to your kids. Or like, hey, this is a possibility. Like, do you find keeping it simple is best? I've heard the term run, hide, fight was, somebody had mentioned it to me, another sergeant. Kind of, where do you guys come down on that?
We come down from the
Go ahead, Les.
that run, hide, fight is exactly backwards.
Okay.
And, I say that somewhat tongue in cheek, but, the other side of that is that, you can run away from a violent conflict. And if there's guns involved, the odds are that you're just going to die tired, right? You're going to get shot. So, if you're faced with that kind of a situation, me personally, I'm a die with your boots on kind of guy. If those are my choices, all right, fine. I'm just going to toe up and we're going to sort this thing. Now everybody isn't built like that, and I know that. And, I understand the intent behind that idea of run, hide, fight. But I just don't think it's terribly effective, and it doesn't address the problem.
Mm-hmm. And do you, I guess, at what age would you, I know it's dependent upon every family and when you deem appropriate for your children, but as far as like, what could help kids in terms of like, whether it's active shooter at school or whatever it may be, what kind of training or what kind of scenarios? Is something that you just kind of verbally go over? Do you ever, actively suit up and let's run through this in the active shooter situation? But what, like, I guess what can really help kids in that kind of the high school, college, where those things kind of, when they're old enough to kind of like you said, stand up, fight for themselves. Do you find anything in particular is helpful, or is it more kind of, getting your kid involved in, jujitsu or like, kickbox or whatever it is, or understanding how to handle a gun, is it more of that kind of thing?
Well, yeah, you kind of like threw a whole lot of things in there. But with the kids, yeah,
Junior turned into a commando.
You had nailed it. It's very individualistic on the children and on the parents' relationship. For instance, I've had 4 boys. 3 of them, wanted to pick this up just like really, really quick. And one of my boys only recently started taking it seriously, and he started picking up quickly, obviously. But it's as far as the age goes, that's going to be between the parent and the child. And then, you got to keep it appropriate. Think about what you do in your house. For instance, I taught my kids if they hear screaming, it's best to lay down on the ground. That's just because, the bullets tend to go higher. Mm-hmm. So, little drills like that at home, when you're defending, when you're, in your home and defending a small area from intruders, there are definitely drills you can give the kids to do there to keep themselves safer. Mm-hmm. But yeah, if you're in a school, the school is going to run that program. Mm-hmm. They'll do what they're going to do with whatever training they get. then obviously, you want to reinforce. So sure, if you can get them into, if they got an interest in martial arts, anything like that is a leg up. If they're older and they're in college and the college allows concealed carry, then obviously you want that and you want appropriate scenarios. Those are available. So, there's a wide plethora of things you can do. And the simplest things, for instance, that first aid, I think we were talking about the first aid, simple little things you can do to save people's lives. Those are certainly, from CPR to stopping the bleed, those are certainly all appropriate. They don't just happen because of gunshot wounds. They happen because of industrial accidents, auto accidents, et cetera, et cetera. So all those things can come in handy, and there's all kinds of training they can do that will not traumatize them.
Yeah.
Doesn't traumatize them. And you'll find that there are young men and women who do want to step up to that challenge quite readily when given when they're old enough and have enough experience behind them. So mainly between you and your kids.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple of things there, kind of two different branches I kind of want to go after. First is personality types, and do you guys notice a certain personality that comes to you who seeks out this training? And because you always think about, I know people who are vehemently opposed to guns. They're afraid of them because they don't understand them, and they think they're like, you look at them, you think they're going to go off. And do you find that those people are traditionally, and we'll kind of get into kind of defending your home and the community and teaming up with people in your community, but do you find that people who typically are going to lead that process to be a certain personality type, or do you find people who come in who are generally afraid of these things, but are more afraid of like a certain thing happening to their family, that you can kind of turn those things around and become kind of a leader in that space? Or are there always going to be certain people who are the shepherds kind of protecting the sheep from the wolves, and you're not really going to have, because I'm always concerned with my community, like you try to get things together, you try to get people involved, and it's like some personality types just are resistant to it. And obviously, depending on the state you live in, I'm in California, so you see more of that. But do you guys find a certain person's coming in there, and kind of how can training affect that?
Yeah. We've never ran personality tests on the people coming through. So I can't say, where they fall into that, but, from personal experience, you get, I think the unifying thing is there's some kind of fear there, whether it's the fear of the handgun they just purchased or the fear of what's potentially happening down the road. And they have the foresight to address it sooner rather than later. So all these people have the will to address their fears and figure something out. So there's obviously something there, because there's obviously a large portion of the citizenry that does not pursue further training, even if they do have a concealed weapons permit. A vast majority of those people don't pursue further training. So there is a rather, small portion of people that look for that. But that's kind of the truth, and pretty much no matter what you do, if you look at police, military, it's a really small portion of the population that tees up to that type of thing too. So yeah, I don't know. I'd be interested in seeing what kind of studies there are out there, but I just really can't say as far as personality types go.
Yeah. Have you guys seen an uptick in people demanding training since kind of all this stuff has taken place over the past,
Oh yeah,
several
of
months?
course. Yeah, sure. Of course. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because I was looking at talking about gun sales, and just in California, it's like you can't even. It's like everything's back ordered. You can't find anything. And they were showing. I saw a poll of people who kind of were supportive of banning firearms and this and that, and it was like a 10-point swing or something pre this kind of stuff happening, and then post this stuff happening, and it's like. I think it was no better argument for the Second Amendment than this happening. Like you couldn't put together any kind of argument than just turning on the TV and watching some of this stuff.
Exactly. Yeah,
well, and the other piece of that, Scott, is yes, there are a ton of brand new firearms out there. and many of them are in new and very inexperienced hands. And a gun is just like any other tool. It's only as useful as the training that you have to build the skill to use it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, for all those folks, if they've recently had an epiphany or what have you, and they've acquired a new firearm, they should definitely seek training and competent training.
Yeah, I mean, you see that a lot where people just don't do anything with it, and they buy it and they have it. And you hope, it'd be nice to see kind of laws that either promote, it's the Second Amendment, and say, hey, but we encourage training, and these are the things you can do to like get qualified, instead of, I feel like sometimes the politicians are so focused on getting people not to buy guns or not to have that proliferate, that it does anyway under the radar, and people aren't getting training, and it's just.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, if you look at the curriculum of most of the state concealed carry applications and training process, it's to me, I can't imagine making something less attractive to people than making them sit in a classroom for 8 hours listening to friggin' law. And calling that, okay, now let's go, shoot whatever, 25 rounds, 50 rounds, and we'll call you certified. Don't get me wrong. I think understanding the law is very important. But, when it comes to carrying a concealed weapon, what you really want is the confidence to know that you can get the job done if you have to.
Yeah.
So there's, it's amazing how the state can take anything potentially exciting and make it as boring as hell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you can just see how people's perception of shootings, and they go, "Oh, why couldn't the cop just shoot him in the leg? Or why couldn't they just, hit his hand and like he could drop the?" It's just like people's like idea of like how this stuff goes down is so weird to me, and like where do you pick this up? But it's like
movies.
Yeah, you can see it driven by a lot of that narrative.
Yeah.
Now, besides getting appropriate training, right, coming to people like you guys, if a family or a person starts getting concerned in terms of defending their home, defending their family from a single attacker, or it's a mob, the idea of target hardening, do you guys have any tips or ideas or kind of how you guys approach that in terms of getting your house? And you kind of mentioned it earlier about, if you're in a room and someone's trying to get in the house, there's things you can practice with your kids. What are the kind of the outlines, I guess, would you give, whether it be a single person living by themselves or a family?
Yeah, it's first of all, one, I really would get into wherever you live and find out what those laws are. Mm-hmm. Some states have what they call the castle doctrine, allow you to defend that home without having to retreat, defend from the front door if you want to. Other states require you to retreat in your own home. Each one of those is going to potentially present different scenarios for you. But I mean, the general thing is in your home, you kind of want to create that hard point. For instance, if you have, let's say you're live up on a multiple story home and you've got your bedrooms upstairs, you can defend up there, right? Mm-hmm. Instead of having to go clear the rest of the house, you can call the police. You can defend a very small area from bad guys getting access to the really important stuff, that is your family. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to go clear the house. You can call the police. They'll come. They'll come. They'll make sure that thing's clear, and they know how to do that quite well. So, mm-hmm. There's different things you can do. Obviously, it's going to depend on your state, how you need to defend, where you find yourself when the break-in happens. The great plan of having everything hard pointed upstairs, and then one evening you're working in the basement doing whatever, and it goes down. You've thrown a wrench in that because now you're not upstairs and defend, and somebody needs to be able to do that, or you need to be able to get up there quickly to help defend that. So I hate to be like generalizing on this, but it is. It's going to be a very unique plan given to your home, given to your situation, but generally speaking, good gun handling habits, understanding the basics of the tactics, how to pie around a corner, how to, set up basically in an ambush is what you're doing when you're creating a hard point like that. All very basic stuff anybody can learn. That's all open source stuff. Just kind of think your way through what's the best way to defend this house. And you probably won't be too far off if, you're setting up a hard point and considering where everybody else in the house can be. So
yeah,
it's tough to just come out and
of course,
throw out generalizations. So I don't want to get too general and you can start picking everything apart too.
Yeah.
So
now I've heard a lot of things about, kids and you hide in closets or you hide in bathtubs because old bathtubs were, is there any place that is typically the more safe? I mean, I know it depends on where they're coming in, what they're using, guns or whatever else. But in terms of like, if you're talking about a mob, my concern is always thinking about, you saw these Molotov cocktails and what if someone throws one on your roof? And it's funny because like you talk about the castle doctrine and then it's like, well, they're all forming in front of your house. And like, you got to kind of sit there and just watch this. And then if one person decides to chuck one of those things onto your roof and now your house is on fire, I guess that probably ends up becoming more important about where you live. Like you said, understanding the laws. And if you don't like the laws, possibly thinking about relocating.
Relocating. I mean, there's things you can do within your local environment, usually that you can do, geopolitically speaking, that can help you change those laws. It won't be the first. I mean, when I was a kid growing up, there was only 1 or 2 states that had CCW permits. So here we are 40 some odd years later and every state has CCW. So, I mean, it's not an impossibility.
Mm-hmm.
But what you can't do is what we've been doing is just kind of sitting around waiting for them to make the next law and then sucking it up.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you say that because I don't think people understand. I think I saw it in a political talk and people were, mentioning how important it is to vote and take part in your local elections and caring who your local leaders are. But always the most news coverage that anything gets is the presidential election on the federal level. And you don't see people really caring about who's your mayor, who's the city council, and who's, creating these laws that's going to directly affect you.
Yeah. Who's your sheriff? He's elected official, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who's the police chief? What's their view on the Second Amendment and your ability to defend yourself, your property? So yeah, all those are really important factors you need to be looking at, for sure. Mm-hmm. And if you don't like it, then you need to be actively trying to make a change in it.
Mm-hmm. And as far as community goes, getting involved with your neighbors, is that obviously it seems like it would be an important part of when you talk about more mass civil unrest or things swinging in unfavorable conditions in terms of, I feel like if you live next to a city like I do, LA, I feel like the likelihood of one of these things popping off and spilling into your area is quite a bit higher than if you kind of live on the outskirts. But obviously community, right, it's a big step in kind of preparing it's instead of going it alone, and kind of like, well, I'm going to have my house kind of be a fortified setup, but yet I don't talk to my neighbors if something goes down or.
Yeah, that's a shitty plan. That's a shitty plan. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think we may have touched on this before with the concept of like survival in place, and that requires the neighborhood, that requires the community, that requires your neighbors being on board or at least not working against you, trying to secure yourself, your neighbors, your neighborhood. Mm-hmm. But, generally when things like this happen, as we've seen, people do start paying attention. They do start waking up and they're like, well, that didn't think that could happen before, but obviously it can now. So what am I going to do?
Yeah.
So yeah, the neighborhood, getting with the neighbors, that's where this really gets the traction. The local police getting in on it, getting in on the training, getting in on what you're doing. And it's really full spectrum.
And do you see, it gets into kind of like relationships and kind of like feeling that out. Obviously you can't speak for anybody in their own community, but do you guys have any tips or have you kind of heard from people who kind of approach their communities and whether they receive pushback or not? Is it pretty much if they're not going to be receptive to this, you have to make a decision again about either do you want to stay here or do you want to find another place that's more conducive to what you believe or what you should be doing preparedness?
Yeah, it's fight or flee, right? Are you going to, and that comes down to a decent threat assessment of saying, am I capable of defending in this area? If you don't have the politicians, you don't have the neighbors, it might be time to pack your trash because, what are you going to defend on your own? But if you don't, and I think this all really comes back to what you started out with is the relationships. The police officers that you're seeing, the deputies that you're seeing are usually assigned to that area. Sometimes they will rove around, but usually they've got a territory. They've got that territory for a reason because they know that territory. They know the players in it. They know the actors out there. So it's good for them because they know what's going on, and it's good for the community because they actually know what's going on. So building that relationship, is important. Find out who those local deputies are. Freaking start by waving at them, man. Got a cop driving by, don't flip him off. Wave at the guy, man. But seriously, they're facing the same problems we are. They're not making the laws. It's the politicians making the laws. And then they want these guys to enforce these laws. And these guys, for the most part, don't want to enforce most of these laws, but that's what the law says. So then we get the problems we've been having. And again, it all boils down to that relationship, full spectrum from friendly to through political, through that training, incorporating of the training, like here locally, our instructors, our military and law enforcement guide, local military and law enforcement guys. And, generally speaking, we don't have a problem thus far, knock on wood. We haven't had a problem anywhere we've went with law enforcement because they come in, they see what we're doing. They really want to be part of it because they see a good training package and they don't get enough of that. So they're happy to come in, help, work with us so they can get a part of that too.
Yeah, we're talking about community. It's like, it's never been so obvious to me because when a lot of the civil unrest was going on, my mom, I was concerned, kind of her neighborhood. And the first thing that came to my mind was, obviously, if something were to go down, because there was like these protests close by and there was concern about them spilling into certain areas. And they actually were targeting certain neighborhoods to go into after they would protest to kind of like stoke that fear within residents. And we were concerned. My first concern was, my mom's not going to be able to do this by herself. The neighbors need to be able to know what's going on, and I hope they do know what's going on. And it was such a striking, because in today's day and age, people are so kind of, not everybody, but antisocial. We're on our phones. We don't talk to our neighbors. We don't, especially now we're all covered in masks. We don't, So I was like, man, I hope people are there, and that, all of a sudden, all those relationships that you hope you have, you start wondering, like, did I foster that enough to where, someone would come over to make sure she's okay? And luckily, we lived there for a long time, so she knew everybody, and they were, and there was talk about, hey, if anything happens, they'll take care of it. But it's funny, like, I don't think people, and this goes to kind of this whole subject, they don't think about this stuff until it's like on your doorstep happening. And a lot of times I feel like it's too late at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. I absolutely hear you. We've been, kind of on the forefront of this, telling people, look, just with everything that's coming, we didn't call COVID. We didn't know it was a disease. We knew something would be coming down the pike at some point. And, here we are in December, flattening this curve still. So there's a lot of things going on. We've been talking about this for a long time, and there are a lot of people behind the power curve. There's no doubt about that. So it's really, at this point, it's a lot like triage. We don't have to sell it because the people that understand the threat also have a good inkling of what that cure is. So now it's more of triage. It's not really a sales pitch to people. It's more of a, hey, can we schedule you and get you the training? Because the people that are awake are understanding what's going on. The people that do understand, your best bet is in community cooperation, keeping things running, keeping businesses flowing, keeping your neighborhood safe. Those people tend to pick up because, you look at the people that make up the community. We've got a lot of business owner, military, law enforcement guys. They're kind of the leadership people anyway. They'll go out there, they'll get stuff done. So it's not. Les said it earlier. This stuff isn't rocket science. We've been doing this stuff now for dozens of years. When it comes to cooperation and working together, we've been doing that for hundreds of years. This stuff isn't PhD level understanding of stuff. This is just your basic civilization building stuff that we're talking about. It's not anything crazy. Nothing that hasn't been done before. It's just getting back to what works.
Yeah. So maybe if someone is just a regular civilian, no military, no police training, it sounds like a good approach would be maybe identify some law enforcement people in your community. Maybe they live on a street, maybe another street, maybe a friend of a friend, and maybe approaching them, maybe to be like, hey, I'm interested in this stuff as far as our community goes, our neighborhood goes. And then that would I think that's probably the best jumping off point in terms of, like you said, someone getting something done.
There's always guys like you in the neighborhoods that have military background, law enforcement background, that know guys in the neighborhood that, I've been over a lot of the U.S., man, and that's generally the way it works in neighborhoods. Somebody's got a buddy that's a cop. Somebody knows, has a brother, a best friend, somebody that's doing the beat out here.
Yeah.
And so, let's build those relationships, get the training, let them know that, there are resources. A lot of cops do training on the side anyway. So, if you point them to us, we've got the curriculum built for them. They don't got to build any of that trash. That's a lot of work all on its own. So, we can support those guys. It's not rocket science. It can be done. And the sooner you do it, the better off you are.
Yeah. And I guess before we get close to wrapping it up here, do you see any issue with people's employers kind of entertaining this stuff? Are they still generally resistant to it? I guess it probably depends on what the company is, whether they operate overseas, whether they have high net individuals involved in the company. Do you see a trend one way or another in terms of, if someone goes to work every day and they're concerned about, hey, this doesn't feel if someone comes in here, doesn't feel like anybody really knows what they're doing. Do you see more pushback than a community goes, or how does that play out?
Les's playing field, working with CEOs, the short answer is, there's a pretty big uptick. They're all getting more and more, I won't say enthusiastic, but they're definitely considering that threat. But I'll let Les answer that in detail.
So, primarily what we do at the corporate level at DSI, Scott, is training enterprises to be able to employ their own proprietary security. And yes, there is an increase in interest and demand for what we do. Obviously, there are a lot of forces acting on the enterprise community today that weren't, even 12 months ago. Between the economics of COVID and the politics of politics, and kind of the entire idea that businesses and primarily mom and pop shops have been under attack with all the civil unrest and all that sort of stuff, coupled with just a greater awareness now that the police can't be everywhere all the time. So business owners are increasingly in a situation where they have to make difficult decisions about, am I willing to defend my enterprise and my livelihood and the livelihoods of my employees? And, again, increasingly the answer is yes, I don't have a choice, right? Because again, the police, despite best intentions, best efforts, can't be everywhere, at all times. And as you referenced earlier, that's really not the law enforcement role, right? It's their job is not really to be there when a crime occurs, but to respond after it's occurred. So yes, there's an increase in demand. We are having an awful lot more conversations with the enterprise community generally about how do they implement in-house security, train their employees, understand whether or not does that ridiculous no gun sign actually work, or do people just walk past that thing?
Yeah.
If if what they have is bad intent, that sort of thing. So yeah, there's certainly an increase in demand.
Yeah. And out of curiosity, I've always wondered this, and I don't know if you guys have the answer or not, but in terms of like at that corporate level, businesses, whether it's overseas or here, how common is, and I know it completely depends on what they do, but like for overseas, and they always talk about abductions and whether it's a gunman or whatever else. How real is that threat for businesses? Is that something that you guys see a lot of a concern for? Is it something that you only see in movies? How does that come down?
It's definitely not only seen in movies. I think there was just this year alone, I think there's like been 2-3 cases of multimillionaire tech giants that have ended up disappearing and showing up dead, and that includes in the United States.
Okay.
So, but again, you got 300 million people. You got 3. So, and the numbers could be bigger than that. I don't know what the numbers are, but there's just at least 2 or 3 that pop into my mind. Well, they're small numbers, and those small numbers are just like your small numbers of being likely, to get into a bad situation. Definitely with police, it's a lot harder because they're much higher probability because they're always sniffing out problems.
Yeah.
So I think those numbers, and I don't know, I'm not a statistician. I think those numbers are staying probably pretty close to the same. I mean, we got 6 and there were only 3. We'd, have a huge jump in percentage. So that can be kind of misleading as well. So, again, it comes down to the basics, and, those basics are, for instance, I would like to think if I weren't in this industry and I were running some other type of, in some other industry, this would still be a concern to me. I would still want my teammates, the employees, as many as possible, trained and armed, because that's where bad things can end up stopping real quick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
that's a big deal.
Yeah, and I just in that quick conversation we just had, it's like I thought about just vacations and people going to other countries and taking trips, and then every now and then you do hear about people vanishing, and that's I haven't done a whole lot of international travel at all, so I've never just you always see the government warnings and stuff or travel advisories, and it's crazy. I know some people who have friends who've gone into North Korea and they do some wild travel. I'm just like, man, I would never in a million years do that. I mean, could you hear about the stuff in Mexico going off every now and then? Is that still your minuscule risk when you do those kind of things? I know it depends on where you go, but in terms of defense and your family and whether it's not business, do you still see Americans targeted abroad?
Well, I mean, Americans are always going to be an attractive target. Mm-hmm. But I don't think we've seen like a huge uptick. I could be wrong. I could be completely wrong. There could be some data out there that's fresh and new that I don't know. It takes a while for this data to flow through, but as far as I know, I don't think there's been an uptick. But again, just like in your personal life when you're not traveling, as low as those odds are, those odds don't matter a damn if it happens to you.
Exactly, yeah.
I mean, then it's all academic at that point. You happen to be the guy that got the shitty crapshoot, so it goes back. But, if you have the skills and you know how to defend yourself, it gives you a whole different level of calm. Mm-hmm. And just having those skills in the back pocket are always nice, just because it does give you that peace of mind. And anytime you travel, you got to be, paying attention to what's going on around you, at the very least. Mm-hmm. So, but I wouldn't. Yeah, I'm fairly confident in my skills. I don't go around looking for trouble at all, but I'm just kind of always try to be always aware of what's going on around me, not because I'm paranoid, just because, crazy stuff can happen, even if it's unintentional. Condition yellow. Yeah. Aware of your surroundings is always a good.
And for kind of the last little topic here, Civil War. And I know it's some people hear that word and they go, oh, that's, being neurotic, or you're being a sensationalist, or you're trying to stoke fear for whatever maybe political agenda that you have. But I think we talked about this before. It's like my dad, who has since passed away, it's like he used to talk about how he could see that coming, and I always would just dismiss him and be like, oh, you're crazy. That's not going to happen. This is just, people stoking the flames. But this past year, I've really stopped and thought, wow, that I could see how this could happen. And I could see how politicians are playing this game of, driving up support for their cause, or building their power through, allowing some of this stuff to occur, but yet they're creating this animal that they might not be able to get back into the box, which I don't think they will. How do you guys view that? And I know that's probably a concern of a lot of people who come into you for training. And how do you think this will go if and when it happens?
Man. So yeah, first of all, there's not, I've got a pretty wide community, guys. I know, real sharp guys. And there's not one of these operators that I know, police, law enforcement, that think that would even, I know there's guys out there, they're like, yeah, Civil War, we need that. I don't know that one serious, honest guy who's ever seen a Civil War in another country thinks that they want to bring that to American shores. Mm-hmm. That's horrible. Mm-hmm. Having said that, we have over a generation now that has been know nothing but war. Mm-hmm. Young men back in 2000 that are nearing their military retirement date have known nothing since their enlistment but war. We've got bring that up because a lot of law enforcement are military guys nowadays. Mm-hmm. A lot of military law enforcement, from my experience, just from my pool of guys, I don't think that the left is going to get quite the type of reception that they would think through more, let's say, malleable law enforcement and military guys. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it wouldn't be good any way around, but I just don't see that panning out well for the left. So let's just hope we never get there.
Yeah, because you look at my concern was, like, you see certain politicians and certain trends kind of bubbling up, whether that's a socialist trend or whatever their view is, and right now they're in the minority, and you're like, oh, they're the crazies, they're the fringe, but you can see over time how that has already shifted. And you picture another 50 years, 100 years down the road, and it's like, well, how's that going to shift more? And then what happens if these people ever get power to where they're controlling things like the military, or, able to alter certain rights that we have? And that's where I get like, man, you see how easily it can happen. Whereas before it's considered like a fringe thing, but it's like, it's not that, far off. And I share the same sentiment as you're describing. Is like a lot of these people who've seen this stuff, I'm not saying I have seen this stuff, but overseas, like, don't want any part of that. And I see some stuff that's, on Twitter, some people kind of like promoting that idea. And I'm just like, man, it just seems like just an utter catastrophe. But yet I feel like there's going to be, I don't know. I feel like we got so close to the edge this last time. And then, fast forwarding into the future, like these things seem cyclical, like something will set it off. It'll die away. People won't worry about it. It'll come back. And each time it comes back, it's like a little bit worse,
Yeah, but and on the nice side of this is, people have been waking up. People mm-hmm. are like, holy crap. For instance, the enterprise owners are like, oh, wow, this really could happen. Yeah. I really do need to consider this as a possibility and prepare for it. So the good news is, as bad as it wasn't worse. Mm-hmm. Thank God. And you're starting to see communities and people saying, okay, no, that'll do. Thank you. We're not doing this anymore. Yeah. Big boys, the adults are coming out now. And we're putting an end to it. So mm-hmm. I think you're going to see probably more of that than God, let's hope not a civil war. Yeah.
Yeah, more inflammatory stuff. I guess to wrap it up, I guess obviously I want people, I mean, where's the best place to go to see your information? I know we've talked about it at length last time our conversation, and I checked out your website and there's just like so much information. What are the first steps if someone is interested in getting training? Where can they go to get more information? And kind of the second part to that is, do you recommend people, always talk about home defense, going and buying guns, should they be even doing that if they're not planning on coming to people like you and get training, or at least go shoot and understand what they're doing? Because I feel like a lot of people, like we talked about, are getting guns and then kind of just sitting on them, but it makes them feel safer, like they have something if something does go off.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So www.distributedsecurity.com is the way to get a hold of us, and then info@distributedsecurity.com if you've got questions. We can answer those for you, not a problem. And so then the second part of that, so obviously we're full-throated supporters of the Second Amendment. And, we look at the statistics. We can see that most gun owners are not irresponsible people and they do the right thing. Would we want them to get training? Well, absolutely, because good training gives you better skills, and better skills increase your probability of survival. So absolutely, get the gun. Mm-hmm. If you're thinking you need the gun for protection, just realize it's not a magic talisman. It doesn't do the work for you. It's a tool, like Les said earlier. You got to learn how to use it. Use it effectively is not just pointing and praying. It's there's a bit of training that goes a long way. And if you really think about it, 16 hours plus 20 minutes, 3 to 4 times a week isn't that big of a sacrifice to become very confident in your skills and abilities.
Mm-hmm. I think it's important to understand that, without training, a gun is a really expensive paperweight. So, if you're gonna commit the resources, and yes, I think you should, to buy a gun, then also commit the resources, time and financial, to get yourself proper training.
Mm-hmm. I know this is probably a pretty solid topic you could go into, but I guess if you guys had to point to what are the most effective firearms to buy, a handgun versus shotgun versus like a rifle, just for home defense, if someone's looking to purchase, what should people typically be looking at, especially if they're not, they don't have a whole lot of experience with firearms? What would be kind of the simplest entry for them?
Well, the simplest, fastest entry would be a handgun, because then you can get a permit and you can start carrying that with you wherever you go. Mm-hmm. That's a lot harder to do with a rifle and a shotgun. So it's really serving dual purpose. It's your protection at home and away from home. Then rifles are pretty easy to use, high capacity. You can do that too if you can afford both. By all means, get yourself some ammo, get quality equipment. I hate seeing guys come through spending, $1,000-$2,000 on a high-end handgun, and they walk in with a $25 cheap plastic holster that they're going to bet their lives on. So get good equipment, stuff that you're going to be carrying, like holsters and slings and good magazines. But yeah, that'd be the recommendation.
Cool. Yeah, I know holsters are huge, and when I was a policeman, they had like the two button one at the top, one at the back. And I remember just trying to get it out. And sometimes it would get stuck and the leather would bend and I couldn't snap it. And it was just like, people were talking about how many times you need to draw your weapon just to get that fluid motion and be able to pop it out when something crazy happened. And that was always a weird fear in the back of my head. It's like, man, if something goes off and I try to get this out of my holster, is that leather going to catch again? And then they came out with these cool flip downs and stuff that were a lot quicker.
Yeah. Technology. I love it.
Yeah. Well, I
love it. It's great.
Oh, I know. It's amazing, what they're going to come out with in the future. And then you probably have your own AI defense at your home that can sift
your own
defense.
I'm down with that.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much for coming on. I hope people found this informative, gave them kind of a roadmap of where to go and what to start thinking about. And if you're worried about some of these things and defending your family on just your own home or your community or your church or where you work. So I thank you guys again for coming on and sharing your wisdom and experience, because I think it's sometimes I think people are embarrassed maybe to ask sometimes, or don't know who to ask. So I thank you guys for coming on and sharing that.
Yeah, thanks for having us on. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you for listening. Bye.
You've been listening to the Dad's Doomsday Guide.
So enlightening. I loved it.
Get more episodes and videos at themadmachinist.com.
Superb.
Oh, hell yeah!